AITAH for telling her she's on her own after our dad died? Was ITA, my father, 56M, passed away this month, ending his own life. He left behind my siblings Josh, 24M, Ella, 18F, and me, 20F. My dad was a great man and a good father. He loved us very much, although he made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, but his left a deep mark on our family, and that weight was felt even more after his death. For some context, before I was born, my mother found out that my father had an affair. It was devastating for her, but she decided to forgive him and continue with the marriage because she believed it had been just a one-night mistake, something fleeting that wouldn't have any consequences. Years later, that belief turned out to be wrong. About a year or two before my father's death, we received an unexpected blow. We discovered that we had a sister on his side, Yvette, 19F. Her biological mother had passed away, and my father, being her only living relative, took her in. Her arrival was an emotional earthquake for our family. No one knew of her existence, and her presence unearthed all the wounds we thought were healed. My mother, poor woman, had to accept Yvette's presence reluctantly, but not without pain. That situation was the straw that broke the camel's back. My parents ended up divorcing, and since then, my siblings and I couldn't help but blame Yvette for it. Despite everything, we tried to be politely neutral with her. We did the bare minimum to maintain a respectful relationship while our father was still alive. But we didn't feel connected to her, and to be honest, we didn't want to. She, for her part, tried to get closer to us, but we simply couldn't see her as part of our family. When my father passed away, that thin connection disappeared completely. We no longer felt any obligation toward her. During the funeral, Yvette tried to talk to us several times, but we ignored her. It was a very awkward and tense moment. At the burial, she began crying hysterically, as if she had had a significant relationship with him, which frankly we couldn't understand. Why did she care so much? She had barely lived with him for a few years. As we were leaving the cemetery, Yvette tried to follow us. That's when I snapped. I told her to get lost, that we weren't her family and never would be. I told her that now that our father was gone, she was on her own. Yes, it may have been cruel, but at that moment, I was tired and full of anger. She tried to defend herself, saying that she just wanted to be with her family, but to me, those words meant nothing. In the end, we left her there and blocked her on all social media. Recently, our extended family found out about all this, and now they are criticizing us for being so harsh with Yvette. They insist she did nothing wrong and deserves our support, but for us, it's hard to see things that way. She came into our lives and, without meaning to, destroyed what was left of our family. My mother is entirely on our side and believes Yvette brought this on herself, but our other relatives have taken her side. And honestly, we now feel isolated. Was I TA? I'm trying to understand if my reaction was justified or if, in my grief, I ended up being a bad person. Update 1. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time to read my story and share your opinions. Honestly, I didn't expect my post to receive so much attention, let alone so many comments. It's been overwhelming, but also very eye-opening. Over the past few days, I've been reading all the responses, from the most understanding to the most critical ones, and I have to admit they've changed my perspective in many ways. One of the most repeated points was that Yvette didn't choose the circumstances of her life, nor the fact that she is my father's daughter. Many of you also pointed out that while my family's pain is valid, it doesn't excuse how we treated Yvette during and after the funeral. At first, I felt defensive. I thought, they don't know my full story. They don't understand how much my mom, my siblings, and I have suffered. But the more I read, the harder it became to ignore the obvious. Yvette has also suffered. She lost her biological mother, was handed over to a man she barely knew, and then had to face a family that clearly didn't want anything to do with her. My initial reaction was to try to justify myself, but now I realize that I may have been too harsh and lacking empathy. I talked to my siblings, Josh and Ella, about this. Honestly, it wasn't an easy conversation. Both of them are very firm in their stance. To them, Yvette is still the living reminder of our father's mistakes and everything we lost as a family. Josh was the most vocal, saying something like, I don't understand why we have to deal with this now. We already lost Dad, and now it feels like we're losing our dignity too. Ella, for her part, stayed quieter, but it's clear she sides with Josh. Despite this, I felt like I needed to do something. I can't speak for my siblings, but personally, I believe that if I don't at least try to understand Yvette's perspective, I'll always carry this feeling that I could have handled things better. So, I decided to take the first step. Yesterday, after a lot of thinking, I sent Yvette a message. It was brief and direct because I didn't know how to start. I wrote something like, Hi Yvette, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to apologize for how we handled things at Dad's funeral. I know it wasn't fair to you, and I'd like to talk more if you're open to it. I wasn't expecting an immediate response, but to my surprise, she replied within a few hours. Her message was very simple. "Thank you for reaching out. I'd like to talk too. Let me know when you're available." I have to admit, I felt a weight in my chest when I read that. I'm not sure if it was guilt, relief, or maybe a mix of both. I never thought she'd be so open to talking after how we treated her. Now I'm nervous because I don't know exactly what to say or how this conversation will unfold. The only thing I know is that I want to listen to her because I believe we've never really given her that chance. As for my feelings, I'm still dealing with many conflicting emotions. On one hand, I feel like I'm betraying my mom and my siblings by trying to connect with Yvette. On the other hand, I think this situation has already caused enough damage and I don't want to keep fueling resentment. Was I TA? I keep asking myself that. Maybe I was too rigid, too quick to judge. Maybe I still am. But I'm starting to believe that there's a way to handle this without causing more harm, and I hope I'm on the right path. I'll be meeting with Yvette in the coming days. I don't know how it will go, but I plan to be honest and to listen. I promise to update you all after that conversation. Thank you again for your comments and for opening my eyes to a perspective that, honestly, I wasn't seeing. Update 2. A few weeks ago, as I mentioned in my previous update, I reached out to Yvette. At first, I didn't know what to expect. Part of me thought she might completely ignore me after how we treated her at the funeral, and honestly, if she had, I wouldn't have blamed her. But to my surprise, she responded and agreed to meet with me. Her response was a relief, but it also made me nervous. I didn't know what to say, how to start, or if I could even handle the conversation without letting my emotions take over. We met at a quiet cafe near where she lives. When I saw her, I was struck by how young she looked. Sure, I knew she was only 19, but in person, she seemed so vulnerable that I felt guilty immediately. We greeted each other with some awkwardness, but I decided to be honest right from the start. I told her I wasn't sure how to handle this conversation, but that I wanted to listen to her. What followed was one of the most emotional conversations of my life. Yvette spoke about what it was like growing up without her biological mother, with a father who was practically a stranger. She told me that when she came to our house a couple of years ago, she was terrified. Not only was she grieving the loss of her mother, but she was also afraid of being rejected by us. "I knew you didn't want me there," she said at one point, tears in her eyes. "But I had nowhere else to go." She also shared how our father's death had affected her. For her, even though her relationship with him wasn't perfect, he had been her only stable family connection in recent years. Losing him meant being completely alone in the world. That hit me like a brick. While I had been consumed with my own sadness and anger, I had never stopped to consider how lonely she must have felt. I asked her if she had ever felt resentment toward us for how we treated her, and her response was surprisingly honest. "At first, yes," she admitted, "but then I understood that you were all going through a lot too. I just wanted to be part of something, but I know my presence made everything more complicated." That confession left me speechless. Here was this girl carrying the weight of being the reminder of my father's mistakes, and yet she was trying to justify our actions. And in that moment, I realized how much my anger and prejudices had shaped my perception of Yvette. She never intended to destroy our family as I had previously thought. She was simply looking for a place to belong, something I think we all need at some point in our lives. The conversation ended on a more positive note than I expected. Yvette thanked me for taking the time to listen to her, and I told her that I wanted to try to improve our relationship. It was a small step, but a significant one. I can't say that we're best friends now, or that everything is resolved, but I feel that at the very least, there's a beginning. As for my siblings, Josh and Ella, they are still very closed off to the idea of talking to Yvette. When I told them about our meeting, Josh basically said I was wasting my time and that he had no interest in rebuilding a relationship that never existed. Ella didn't say much, but just nodded with a neutral expression. It's frustrating, but I understand that everyone has their own process. I just hope that, with time, they can open up a little more. To be honest, this experience has left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, I'm relieved to have taken this step, to have allowed myself to listen to and understand Yvette. On the other hand, I feel like there's still a long way to go, both for me and for my family. But now I have hope, something I didn't have before. Was I TA? I think I was to some extent. I was unfair to someone who was already dealing with enough struggles. But I also believe that admitting it and trying to fix it is the most important thing I can do now. Update 3. After our first meeting, Yvette and I have continued seeing each other occasionally. Honestly, every meeting has helped me understand her more and at the same time, learn more about our father from her perspective. For example, in one of our conversations, Yvette shared stories about him that I had never heard before. Small things like how he used to try to make her breakfast on Sundays, even though he almost always burned the toast, or how he would read her mystery books because he knew she loved them. Those anecdotes showed me a different side of my dad, one I didn't know, and honestly, it moved me deeply. I realized that although my relationship with him was longer and deeper, Yvette also had valuable and unique memories of her time with him. I can't help but feel that in some way this creates a bridge between us. We share a bond with someone we both loved, even if it was in different ways. It's strange how something as painful as his loss can become the beginning of something new. As for my mom, I decided to talk to her about Yvette. It was a delicate conversation because I know how much it hurts her to remember my dad's mistakes and how those mistakes affected her life. To my surprise, though she is clearly still hurt, my mom was quite understanding. She said something I didn't expect. If she's important to you, then she's important to me. That gave me the push to move forward. I suggested organizing a small dinner at home, just the three of us, so Yvette could feel included, even if just for a moment. When I told Yvette about the idea, at first she was nervous. She asked me several times if my mom was really okay with this. I assured her that she was, and after some thought, she agreed. The dinner was, in a word, emotional. It wasn't perfect or comfortable all the time, but it was a huge step. My mom was polite and cordial, and she even asked Yvette about her life and her plans for the future. I could see in Yvette's eyes how much that small gesture meant to her. I think it was the first time she truly felt welcome in our space. On the other hand, Josh and Ella remain a complicated subject. I told them about the dinner, hoping they would at least show some interest, but their reaction was cold. Josh said something like, "Do whatever you want, but don't expect me to take part." Ella, as she usually does, stayed quiet, though her expression said it all. Disapproval. I can't blame them for feeling the way they do, but I can't help wishing that someday they'll be willing to try what I'm trying. I know it's a process and that everyone has their own timing, but sometimes the waiting can be frustrating. What has surprised me most during this journey is how much I've been learning, not just about Yvette, but about myself. I've realized that for a long time, I let my anger and resentment dictate how I viewed the situation. I clung to a version of events that made me feel like a victim, but now I understand that things aren't that simple. We've all been hurt in some way in this story, and that includes Yvette. Was I TA? No, I think I was. I was unfair in placing my negative emotions onto someone who, like all of us, was simply trying to find her place in the world. But I also believe that admitting it and trying to make amends is the best thing I can do now. I still don't know how all of this will end. I don't know if Josh and Ella will ever see Yvette the way I'm starting to see her. I don't know if our family will ever be completely functional or if there will always be this rift. The only thing I know is that I don't want to look back years from now and feel like I didn't do enough to try to heal these wounds. Update 4. It's incredible to think about how much things have changed in these 6 months. When I first posted, I was filled with anger, pain, and resentment. My perspective was completely clouded by those emotions, and I couldn't imagine a scenario where things could be different. But here I am, 6 months later, in a place I never thought I would reach. My relationship with Yvette has improved a lot. We've continued to meet regularly, and each encounter feels more natural, more authentic. We've built a connection based on sharing, understanding, and above all, listening. It's not always easy, but it's definitely worth it. One of the things that's helped me the most has been stopping seeing her as an intruder or a reminder of my father's mistakes, and starting to see her simply as who she is, my sister. In recent weeks, we've even talked more openly about our father. Yvette has told me how despite everything, he tried to be a good father to her in the years they spent together. While that doesn't erase the pain or the decisions he made, it has allowed me to see my dad from another perspective. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying to do the best he could with the circumstances he created. Recently, we organized a bigger family gathering. It was a simple dinner at my mom's house. I invited Yvette, and to my surprise, Josh and Ella agreed to come too. I won't lie, at first the tension was palpable. Josh was distant, almost cold, and Ella avoided making eye contact with Yvette. But little by little, things began to flow. During dinner, Yvette shared a story about how Dad used to try to learn how to cook to surprise her, and how he always ended up burning everything. It was such a simple thing, but so human, that I even saw Josh crack a smile. That's when I knew there was hope. I don't think Josh and Ella are ready to have the same relationship with Yvette that I do, but this was a first step, and that's enough for now. After that night, Josh and Ella told me that they respect what I'm trying to do, even though they're still not sure how much they want to get involved. Honestly, that's already a huge step for me. I know I can't force anyone to feel something they're not ready to feel, but knowing that they're willing to be in the same space as Yvette is more than I expected. As for my mom, she has been a pillar of support in this process. I know it hasn't been easy for her, but she's shown a strength and empathy that inspire me. Recently, she told me, "I can't change what happened, but I can decide how to face what comes next." Those words have stayed with me and guided me on this journey. The most important thing I've learned through all of this is that compassion doesn't have to be a sacrifice. You can feel pain, anger, even resentment, and still make room for compassion. Yvette didn't choose the circumstances of her life, just as we didn't choose ours. But now, together, we are choosing how we want to move forward. Was I TA? Yes, I think I was in the beginning. I was unfair and I let my pain define how I saw and treated Yvette. But what matters now is that I'm working to change that. And while not everything is resolved, I feel like we're on a good path. I hope that my dad, wherever he is, can see what we're building. I don't know if he'll ever be proud of his own decisions, but I hope he's proud of how we face the consequences of them. Thanks again for being a part of this story.